This video is provided by me, LiQWYD and Trab Shimrim, and framed by Mr. Zanan, professor at the Haifa School of Technology in Saleh. Hey, welcome! In this course, we're gonna be teaching you everything you need to know to get started writing programs in Ruby. So, whether you are an experienced programmer or not, this video is intended for everyone who wishes to learn the Ruby programming language. Today, we would like to give you an overview of how to code with Ruby. But before to do anything, we have to know what's Ruby language and why we have to learn it, namely the fields of use. Then we're gonna start with the basics, when we will see the different data types, how to display and get an user input. Besides, we will learn how to manipulate arrays and make methods, as well as we will see the conditional structure like if-else statement and case expression. Also the loops as for and while buckle. After all, we will finish with class and object part. By answering the question, what's Ruby language? I want to tell you that Ruby is one of the object-oriented programming language in the first place. And it's open source, that is to say, it will have a large number of developers working to improve it and treat any problem that appears in it quickly. Moreover, Ruby is there thanks to the Japanese computer scientist Yukihiro Matsumoto, also known as Mads, in the mid-90s. So Ruby works on most operating platforms such as Windows, macOS, and several versions of Unix. Then, it has a similar syntax to that of many programming languages like C and Java, so it's easy to learn for Java and C programmers. Returning back of time, the beginning of Ruby was in 1993, where Mads was trying to program a language more powerful than Perl and more object-oriented than Python. So the first version was released in 1995. Its purpose, as Mads mentioned, is making programming fun. In other words, making a language that is simple and easy to learn like other languages. However, Ruby didn't get much fame after its launch, but in 2005, the Dane David Hanson invented what's known as the Rails, or Frame Ruby on Rails, and this is what has given a great popularity to Ruby. So the difference between Ruby and Ruby on Rails, that Ruby is a programming language like any other language that can program and carry out commands and tasks with it. But Ruby on Rails is an open source software library that includes codes and algorithms that help to get ready-made code in the language without the need to write it by programmers. More than that, Ruby considered one of the most proficient languages in the programming environment, due to its advantages make it superior to other more famous languages and the multitude of fields in which Ruby can be used. As developing web applications, it's perfect for web technology using Ruby on Rails or creating web servers and database.
In this part, we will deal with the basics of Ruby language. The first thing you must to do to practice Ruby is set up Ruby in your machine. Now we have many ways to write and run a Ruby script. The simple method is using IRB, stands for Interactive Ruby, and opens up an active Ruby session. Also, you can use a notepad, it's the most popular. But I prefer working with Atom because it's a good editor for mini coding files and it's free and open source. So we start with how to print something on the screen. All you have to do is just type print space open and close quotation mark, and we can put any text we want like hello world. And now when I run this program by clicking Ctrl+Shift+B, we see hello world gets printed on the screen over here. There is also another way to print something on the screen using puts your text. I put my name for example and it's displayed here. So what's the difference between puts and print? The difference between them is that puts adds a new line after executing and print does not. Now, how we can write a comment? So we have two possibilities. When we want to write a single line comment, we start with the hash character. Also, you can comment multiple lines using equal begin and equal end. Now, let's move on to a Ruby variable. The Ruby variable is a way to give names to things in your Ruby programs. As you see, I want to print these lines on the screen. Hello everyone, my name is Mary. I'm 18 years old. So when I want to change a character's name, for example, or the age, I had to manually go into my program and replace each value. But using Ruby variables, we can change any value easily. So we write the name of the variable equals any value you want between two quotation marks because it's a string type, and the same thing of age equal to quotation mark even if it's not a string type. Don't worry, we will deal this case afterwards. Okay, now we don't need this. We can just do plus and the name of the variable and parentheses, it's important. We can also use the hash character and the name of the variable between two square brackets. In this part, we want to talk to you about data types. The data types in Ruby is essentially a type of data that we can represent and use inside of our Ruby programs. And by default, Ruby is going to support a bunch of different data types. So these are basically just type of information that we can use in our programs. And we're going to look at how we can store the different types of data inside of variables. So at the first, the most basic type of data that we can represent in our Ruby programs is called a string. And string is basically just plain text. So I could just make a string called like name and I could set it equal to Mike. So this is an example of string. It's basically a variable and we're storing a string value inside for it. So the string is just like any plain text, right? We could also store numbers. So for example, I could store a whole number, like if I wanted to specify someone's age, I could say age is like 55. And with the number, we didn't need to use these quotation marks. You can also use decimal numbers. So this why here 55 is what we referred to as an integer. And an integer is basically just a counting number like 1, 2, 3, 4. But a decimal number is different because a decimal has decimal points after it. And a lot of times, especially in Ruby, more refer to these numbers as floating point number. So if I wanted to specify a floating point number, I could say like result, and we can set it equal to like 3.2, whatever decimal point you want to represent inside of Ruby. You can also make this negative. So I can make this like a negative 55 or a negative 3.2. We can also store something called a boolean. And a boolean is basically a true or false data type. For example, if I created a variable called ismail, this variable can tell us whether or not someone is male, in which case it's going to be like a true or false value, right? So I can set this equal to true. We can also create one, it can be like is tall, and this boolean variable would tell us whether or not someone's tall. So if you are not tall, that it would be false. We can also store one more type for information, which is called nil. And the nil data type basically means that it doesn't have a value. So for example, if I created a variable called like flows and I set it equal to nil, so we can say that it has no value. So these are the basic data types that you are going to be using as a beginner to the Ruby programming language.
So if you want to type a code in Ruby with any text editor, you have to follow specific steps. So I will show you this last step by step to start. Okay, so the first thing that you should do is open Notepad app, go to File, and click on Save As. Now you should to name your file. I will name it Ruby program, and I'm going to add .rb like an extension of Ruby language. So if you forget it, so nothing can work. As you see, the file Ruby program is created. So you can open it with the Notepad++. But before typing your code, you should to choose the language. So we chose the Ruby language. Now, I want to talk you about working with strings in Ruby. So strings are one of the most common data types in Ruby or any other language, and this is for a good reason. A lot of time in our programs, we're going to want to represent and store and work with text data. So that we're going to look at some predefined functions to manipulate strings. So the first thing that I want to do is creating a variable. His name is, for example, name, and I'm going to affect him the sentence I love Ruby programming. In this case, if I want to convert these letters to uppercase letters, we can use uppercase function. We write puts name of variable, in this case name, point uppercase with two parentheses. Before we save this program, we need another instruction, system pause between two brackets and quotation mark, to keep the screen while opening Ruby program file. And run the file. As you see, these letters are transformed to the capital letters. Also, we have downcase function. From its name, it's clear that it's a function that converts to the lower letters. So I'm going to do the same again. Here are the uppercase letters are transformed to the lower letters. Great. So now I'm going to type spaces in the beginning and the end of this sentence. So in this situation, I will use stripe function, which serves to delete these spaces. But if I was typing puts name without adding point stripe function, the results will be as you see inside these quotes with these spaces. Another function, if we want to count or know how many characters exist in this variable name, so we have length function, but one space considered as a character. So the results, we have 23 characters, including spaces between words. Also, we can search does a word exist or not by this function include next to question mark beside the word I'm looking for example, love. So this function returns a Boolean value. If this word existing in this sentence, it's going to return true, else it's going to return false value. The word love is existing in this sentence, so it's return true value. However, if I am looking for Mad's word, it's not existing in this sentence, so it's going to return false value. So I want to mention a very important thing, that include function makes the difference between the capital and lower letters. So to understand, I type here love with small letters. So in this case, it's going to return false, even the word love is existing. That's because love in this sentence is written with capital letters, and as we're looking for love with small letters. Let's move on to the numbers. This type of data is very useful in any programming language, among them Ruby. You will see numbers in code to perform price, age, and size calculations and more. For the main operation, we find addition looks like plus symbol. For example, I'm going to display 4 plus 2 are 6. We have subtraction. For example, 4 minus 2 is 2. Or multiplication, 4 times 2 is 8. Also, we have division. Looks like a slash symbol, like 4 divided by 2 is 2. Without forgetting, modulo is 0, so it means the rest of division operation and looks like a percentage symbol. And to be sure, I'm going to type 4 modulo 2 is 0. Then we have power operation. Looks as 2 star. For example, 4 to the power 2 is 16. So these are some basic operations that you should know. Also, as we have methods on the strings, we have also the methods on the numbers. I will share with you some methods. Gray, we have math.sqrt function. It calculates square root of numbers. For example, the root of 4 is 2. Another function that makes absolute value is IBS. So if I do minus 3 point IBS 2 parentheses, it will return 3. To make the program to interact with the user, it needs input from him. So to do this, we can use gets method because gets takes input from the keyboard in string format and stores the value in the variable. For example, I will ask user for his name and I'm going to add this instruction name equal gets. This statement takes a string input from the user and stores it in the variable called name. It also appends a new line character at the end of the input entered. When you type the variable name, it displays what is stored in it. So I will type here print hello plus name plus comma welcome between us. These parentheses are obligatory when we want to display a variable with a string and separate them with plus symbol to concatenate. So I used print function due to display hello next to the entered name next to welcome between us. Okay, going to see what's happened. I'm going to enter as a name user. So it's display hello user with a new line comma welcome between us. That's because get function append the new line. So to remove it, you can use the function called champ. The following statement remove the new line from the user input. Great. Now we want to ask user for two integer numbers. We should do two variables which receives both values, number 1 and number 2. Then we will display the sum of these values. So I'm going to save this and run the file. As you see, it didn't display the sum, but it displays one after another. Because as mentioned before, gets is a method, gets input in string format, so before doing any arithmetical operation, you have to convert it to the whole number. This can be done using gets point champ point to underscore I. And if you want to convert to the flow number, you can use gets point champ point to underscore f. So we have to save the program and run it. So I will give him the number 5 and the flow number 4.2. It returns 9.2 as a flow number.
An array is a data structure that represents a list of values called elements. Array lets you store multiple values in a single variable. A new array can be created by using the literal constructor or the square brackets and separate the value you want to store with comma. So down here, if I want to create an array, the first thing we have to do is tell Ruby what we want that array to be called. So I make an array that's going to store some weekdays. So I make an array called days. And I'm going to set this equal to array with a capital A. Then we're going to make an open and close square bracket. Inside of this square bracket, I can start putting in some of the pieces of data that I want to store in this array. So here we have an array that has 3 elements inside of it, and each one of these pieces of data are referred to as array elements. Basically, what I did is I created a container that can hold multiple pieces of information. So what I can do now is I can come down here and I can just say like put days, and this is actually going to print out all of the information inside of this array all the data values on my output over here. So let's see now, when I wanted to access one specific element inside of this array. Well, if I want to access just one element, I can make an open and close square brackets, and I can put an index inside of here. So let's say that I want to grab Monday. I can put a 0 inside of here, and 0 refers to the index of this Monday value. So the first element is always in index position 0, and Tuesday is at index position 1, and Wednesday is at index position 2. Another thing I can do is I can access array elements from the back of the array. So for example, I can access Wednesday would be by putting a -1 in here. Tuesday would be -2, and then Monday -3. There's also situations where you are not going to know exactly what elements you want to put inside of the array. So for example, we can just say array.new and then add in information later. So if I want to access specific information about this array, we can use a method. So I could say like days dot, and one really useful one is length. So this will tell me how many elements are inside of this array. So you see over here, we have 3. I can also check to see if certain elements are inside the array. So we can say days dot include, and I'm gonna put a question mark, and over here I can type in an element that I would want to check to see if it's in the array. So I could say like Monday, and now should give us a true value because Monday is inside of the array. If I put like Saturday, now this is going to give a false value because that's not in the array. You can also modify the order of the array, so I can say like days.reverse, and this will reverse all the elements. So now it's going to be Wednesday, Tuesday, and then Monday, as you see over here. You can also sort of different elements in the array. So for example, if I wanted, I could sort all the elements. So if we're working with strings, we would sort them alphabetically. So I put something over here like Andy, even if it makes no sense with the days. It's just to test. Now Andy is going to end up being in the font because it's going to sort the array alphabetically. It's important to note through that if you are going to have an array that has multiple data types, so for example, I put a number like an integer in here, this is going to throw an error now because you can't sort it. There is no way for us to compare like numbers and string inside of Ruby. So that's the basics of working with arrays. Ruby methods are very similar to functions in any other programming language. Ruby methods are used to bundle one or more repeatable statements into a single unit. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a method, and our method is going to be very simple. All it's going to do is say hi to the user. So our method is going to perform one task and has one goal. So down here, I'm going to create my method. First thing we always want to do when we create a method is type out def, and this basically means that we have defined a method. Second thing we want to do is give our method a name like hello. And now what I want to do is hit enter, and I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to type end. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm defining a method block, and anything that's in between def and end is going to be inside of our method. So now I'm just going to type puts and say hello user. So I'm going to run my program and we'll see if this method works. But you will notice over here, when I run the program, nothing's showing up. And that's because when we define a method, the code inside of the method is only going to get executed when we call it. So in other words, we want to execute the code inside this method, we have to call the method. That basically just means we have to say like, hi method, go do your stuff, go perform your task. So I can come down here, and the way I call this method is just by typing out its name. So I can type out hello with parentheses or without if you want. And now Ruby is going to execute this method up here. We can say that by default, a method in Ruby returns the last statement that was evaluated in the body of the method, or you can do this by using return keyword. And one thing we can do is we can actually give this method some information. And the way that I'm going to do that is, after I type the name of the method hello, I'm going to make an open and close parentheses, and over here I just want to specify what's called the parameter. And the parameter is basically a value that whoever is calling this method is going to give to it. So this method can actually accept input, it can accept parameters as input. So over here, I can just type out the name of the parameter I want to accept. So in our case, we'll just call this name. Then down here, instead of saying hello user, I can say hello name. And you'll see in a second this going to use whatever variable and whatever pieces of information gets pasted into this method. So down here, if I want to give this a name, I can make an open and close parentheses, and in here I could type in name, so I could say Mike. So now when we run our program, it's going to say hello Mike. You can also give these things multiple pieces of information, alright?
From here, your real programming learning will start. You will learn about decision making. This means that if a user gives you some input, then you will learn to judge that input and then perform according to it. In real life, we also make conditional decisions. For example, if it's raining, then I will take umbrella, else no. So now let's implement this in Ruby. So the syntax of if statement is as you see. If next to condition and. Between the two keywords if and, we type our statements. For example, we have this code. If the condition grade superior or equal 70 is true, then the statements inside if block are executed. So save the code and run the file. So we can enter the number 80. As you see, when the value is greater than 70, it displayed pass. So I try again with another number, like 20 is less than 70. So it's displayed nothing. So to handle this, we need another type of statement called if-else. This statement executes one set if the condition is true or another set if it's false. In our program, we will add else before the keyword end, and between the two, I will add puts fail. It means if the value less than 70, display fail. I will do the same again, so the result is fail. Also, if we want to have more than two decisions, we can use if-else if statements to make more complex branching statements. So we can do like this program. We ask user for his age. If age less than 18, print you are minor. Else if age greater than 80, print you are a senior. Else print you are of a legal age and your age is under 80. End. So we can save and run the program. If we enter the number 18, it displays you are of legal age and your age is under 80. Or 16, it displays you are a minor. And if we enter 90, it displays you are a senior.
In this part, I want to talk to you about case expressions in Ruby. A case expression is actually just a special type of if statement that we can use to check a bunch of different conditions. So we're going to create a method which is going to map day abbreviation to day names. So for example, each day of the week has an abbreviation, like Monday is MON and gets mapped to Monday, right? Tuesday is TUE and Wednesday is WED, etc. The abbreviation gets mapped to actual full days of the week. So I want to write a method that can take as a parameter one input, and it's going to be one abbreviation, and it's going to take that abbreviation and it's going to spit out the actual name of the day. So I'm just gonna say div, and we need to also include a name over here and a method name. So why don't we call our method getDayName? And inside of here, we're going to pass the abbreviation. So I'm just going to call this day, and day is going to represent the 3-letter abbreviation of the specific day. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable, and we'll just call it day name. And we're going to store whatever the day name ends up being inside of this variable. So I'm just going to set it initialize equal to the empty string, and then down here before we end off the method, I'm going to return day name. So our mission inside of this method now is to give this date name variable the value of the correct day, right? We need to give it the name of the day that corresponds to this abbreviation. So one way that we could do this would be using an if statement. In a situation like that, case expressions are golden. They are gonna help us out so much. So I'm going to get rid of this if block, and over here we're going to set up a case expression. So the way that I do this, just by typing out case, and now I need to give this something. So we're going to give this the value. So we're going to give this the value that we want to compare to a bunch of different values. In our case, it's just day, alright? Because I want to compare it to all the day abbreviation, so we're gonna need to end this off. Now, inside of here, I can create something called the when statement, and it will basically do something when day is equal to a certain value. So I can say when, and now I can compare day to something. So I could say when MON, and basically what this means is when day is equal to MON, then down here we're going to do something. So I can just put some code down here. So what I want to do is set day name equal to Monday. Well, we can use something called the else keyword. And the else keyword is a lot like the if else keyword. So down here, else the name is equal to invalid abbreviation. So I'm gonna say puts, and then it's just called get day name, and we want to pass in an abbreviation, so I'm going to pass this WED for Wednesday. And when I pass it this and we run our program, you will see over here we print out Wednesday. And if I typed something invalid like DAW, so it's gonna say invalid abbreviation. In this part, I want to talk to you about working with while loops in Ruby. So a while loop is basically a structure that we can use inside of our Ruby programs, which will allow us to loop through a particular block of code a specific number of times. So I can basically like write out my while loop, and I could put some code in there. And as long as a certain condition remains true, I'll keep looping over and executing that same code inside that while loop. There is a lot of situations in Ruby where we're going to want to use loops. We're going to want to do something continuously until we need to stop, and so while here was a great way to do that. So over here, I can actually create a while loop, and the first thing I want to do is make a variable like index, and I'm going to set it equal to 1. And down here, I can actually create my while. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just type out while, and then what I need to do is I need to specify a condition. And you always want to make sure that you end this off. So I'm just going to put an end here. Now here is basically how while loop work, all the code in between while and end. So all the code inside of here. that we're going to put inside, there is going to get continuously executed. So it's going to keep getting looped over and keep getting executed as long as this condition is true. As long as the condition that we specify right here is true, then we're going to keep executing the code inside of this loop. So over here I can actually specify a condition. So I'm going to say while index is less than or equal to 5. So essentially what I'm seeing is while index is less than or equal to 5, I'm gonna keep looping through the code inside of here. And actually what I can put in here, we can just put whatever code we want to keep looping over. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna take puts and I'm going to print out the value of index, and then down below here I'm actually going to increment the value inside of index. So I'm gonna say index is equal to index plus 1, or I can just say index plus equals 1. This is going to keep looping through the code inside of here as long as the index is less than or equal to 5. So let's think about what's going to happen here. Actually, let me just show you. So when I execute this code, you'll see over here that I'm actually printing out values between 1 and 5. So remember, we're going to keep looping through this loop as long as the condition is true. So here is how the execution of this program goes. Ruby creates this index variable, gives it a value of 1. The first thing Ruby does when it gets to this while loop is it checks this condition if it's true. Then it's going to start looping through. Once Ruby has finished executing the code inside the while loop, the next thing it's going to do is go back up here to the top of the while loop, and it's going to check this condition again.
Ruby classes and objects are very important in Ruby because in Ruby all is an object. So basically, if you remember, we talk about the data types like string, boolean, flow, so you know it all because we have seen them in detail. Now, you can think of class as your own data type. For example, I'm a person, I have a name, age, gender, and more attributes. So I can make my own type called person by creating a class. By the way, to define a class in Ruby, we use the keyword class next to the class name, in our case person, but the class name must be started obligatory by the capital letter. Also, the keyword end to mentionate the end of class. As we just said, the class person has attributes. So how can I initialize them? In this situation, we can use a method called initialize. In other programming language, they call this a constructor because it allows you to set the initial values for an object. By provoking the object, it means an instance or a copy of class. Okay? So we can pass the attributes that we want to initialize them as arguments of the initialize method. For example, I'm going to pass name, gender, and age. And in the body of this function, I'm going to type at name equal name, at age equal age, and at gender equal gender. These initialized variables are accessed within the class using the operator, but to access them outside of the class, we will use public methods. We will see how to do it, don't worry. Now, to display these values after their initialization, we have to create another method. We can name it display without arguments and use puts function. Puts, the name is in quotes plus at name plus the gender is at gender and the age is at age. So we can add this option \t to make spaces between sentences. Great. Now we can declare an instance of person class called, for example, p1 equal person.new. Inside these parentheses, we have to pass our values. For example, Sukaina as a name, female as a gender, and 18 as an age. Now, to display P1 information, we have to call display function by writing P1.display. That is to say, show me the information of person P1. I'm gonna just save this and run. So as you see, the name is Sukaina, the gender is female, and the age is 18. Can you see spaces add between sentences? Thanks to the \t, it gives an organization for this. Also, we can give all persons the same gender. For example, I'm going to put here gender equal female. And here, I can put only the name and age because the gender have already initialized. If we want to initialize attributes directly or display it without using methods, we can use attribute reader and writer functions to do it. Here, I'm going to remove this and write attr_reader space colon next to the name, comma, space colon age, comma, space colon gender. This is the syntax. So this function attribute reader using to access to the attributes, and to initialize them we have to add attr writer space colon name comma space colon age comma space colon gender. This is also the syntax for attribute writer. Also, we have to remove this because we haven't initialized method to affect these values to variables. Great, so now I'm going to affect my name to the name, p1.name equal Sukaina, and p1.age equal 18, and p1.gender equal female. Also, I'm going to show these values using puts function. Save and run. That's the result. My name is Sukaina, I am a female, and my age is 18. So I want to mention a very important thing, that if you forget this instruction attr_reader etc. and you write here puts to show these values, nothing can work because your program haven't any function to do that, and the system will generate an error. It also applies for attr writer, attribute writer function. So to get away from that, you can use only one function, is attribute accessor, attr_accessor, which plays the role of the two functions. it shows the same result as that of the reader and the writer attributes. So it explains how to access and modify the values of a class in the same class, and now we will see how it's done from another class using getter and setter methods. So getters are used to get the value of an instance variable, while the setter are used to set the value of an instance variable of some class. Also, we define the getter and setter methods in this class that we want to access or set its instance variable. Great. To define a getter, we must write the keyword def next to the name of this function, for example getAge, because we want to access to age variable. Then we have to return @age. We write @symbol since it's an instance variable, and all instance variables in Ruby must begin with @symbol. So to close this function, we type end keyword. Okay, I'm going to define a new class. His name is test, and I'm going to transfer this instruction to test. Here I'm going to keep this, save and run. This is the result. My name is Sukaina, I'm a female, and my age is 18. Okay, no problem. So if I remove this accessor and rerun this program, as you see, the program doesn't execute. That's because of the encapsulation. You have no right to access, so that we must to replace p1.age by p1.getAge. No, it's good. And if we want to change the value of age, we must use setAge. I'm going to do def setAge, new age as an argument, and affect to age the new age @age equal new age, and close set function by end keyword. I will type here p1.setAge 19, save and run. So as you see, the age is changed from 18 to 19.